By the final months of World War II, Adolf Hitler had faced nearly every form of Allied attack and had contended with countless commanders across Europe. Yet even amid the chaos of collapsing fronts and desperate counterattacks, there was one figure who seemed to leave a lasting impression on him: General George S. Patton. Unlike other Allied leaders, Patton was not just another opponent to Hitler. He represented a style of warfare that the Nazi leader both despised and, in a strange way, respected. Reports from his inner circle suggest that in private conversations with his generals, Hitler spoke of Patton not with disdain, as he often did about other commanders, but with a grudging acknowledgement of his brilliance. What struck Hitler most about Patton was his audacity on the battlefield. While other Allied generals moved with caution, weighing risks and waiting for perfect conditions, Patton thrived in motion. Blitzkrieg, the very tactic Hitler had once championed for Germany, found a mirror in Patton's approach. He was fast, aggressive, and relentless, pushing his forces forward with an energy that often caught even the most prepared German units off guard. Hitler's generals recalled him emphasizing that Patton's ability to read the battlefield, to anticipate moves, and to exploit openings was unlike anything they had seen in Europe. It wasn't just luck or brute force. It was a calculated brilliance, an intuition for war that seemed almost instinctive. Hitler also reportedly noted Patton's psychological edge. Unlike some commanders who relied solely on numbers or technology, Patton understood the power of shock and intimidation. His presence alone could unsettle an enemy, and he had a reputation for turning chaos into advantage. The Nazi leader, for all his own mastery of propaganda and fear, seemed to recognize that Patton wielded similar tools, but with skill and precision, not fear alone. In private discussions, Hitler warned that Patton was not a general to be underestimated, that underestimating him could cost entire divisions or even entire campaigns. This was significant because Hitler was a man who rarely acknowledged competence among his enemies. For him to single out Patton reflected the general's exceptional impact on the minds of those he faced. Moreover, Hitler's assessment of Patton extended beyond strategy. He seemed aware that Patton's leadership inspired loyalty and confidence in his troops. Soldiers under Patton's command moved with determination because they believed in his vision and feared his wrath in equal measure. Hitler reportedly told his generals that Patton's combination of personal charisma, discipline, and unrelenting drive made him uniquely dangerous. Where other generals might falter under pressure, Patton seemed to flourish, turning adversity into opportunity. And this ability unnerved the Nazi leadership more than any tactical maneuver could. Even as Germany's situation grew desperate, Hitler's focus on Patton did not wane. He continued to warn his commanders about the American general's approach, analyzing his campaigns in Europe and cautioning that Patton's methods were not conventional. There was a grudging admiration, a recognition that Patton's genius lay not only in his mastery of armored warfare but in his capacity to command, inspire, and strike fear into the hearts of his enemies simultaneously. For Hitler, Patton was more than a general. He was a force that symbolized the relentless momentum of the Allied advance. And his name alone became a measure of the threat Germany faced in those final, frantic months. By the time Hitler made his last assessments in early 1945, it was clear that, among all the Allied leaders, Patton stood apart. He was cunning, fast, and audacious. The kind of commander who forced even Hitler to pause and consider the consequences of underestimating him. In the chaotic swirl of collapsing fronts and retreating armies, Patton's shadow loomed large in Hitler's mind, a testament to the undeniable mark he had made on history, even in the eyes of his most formidable enemy. As Hitler's world unraveled in early 1945, his conversations with his top generals became increasingly revealing, especially when it came to the threat posed by George S. Patton. Unlike the general disdain he often expressed for Allied leaders, when it came to Patton, Hitler's tone reportedly shifted. He didn't speak of him casually or dismissively. He spoke with a precision that suggested genuine concern. He warned his commanders repeatedly to take Patton seriously, not just as an opponent, but as a force capable of altering the course of battles almost single-handedly. These warnings weren't vague or idle. They were strategic, meant to shape German defensive efforts and prevent catastrophic mistakes. Hitler's generals recalled that he emphasized the unpredictability of Patton's movements. Where other Allied commanders followed carefully mapped plans and coordinated offensives, Patton often relied on speed and intuition, striking with a suddenness that left German units scrambling. Hitler reportedly instructed his officers to anticipate unconventional tactics, to expect rapid armored advances in places they believed secure, and to be ready for attacks that seemed illogical on the surface but were devastating in practice. The warnings were almost obsessive, as if Hitler understood that one misstep could hand Patton's forces a decisive advantage. In those final months, when Germany's options were already limited, the idea that a single commander could break through and wreak havoc was terrifying, and Hitler made sure his generals knew it. What made these warnings even more critical was Patton's ability to exploit weakness in ways that weren't always obvious. Hitler reminded his generals that Patton wasn't just attacking positions. He was testing morale, probing for hesitation, and forcing decisions under pressure. A unit that faltered, even briefly, could be isolated and overwhelmed. In some accounts, Hitler went so far as to point out that Patton's reputation for bold maneuvers meant that even a well-fortified line could collapse if commanders failed to anticipate his next move. Unlike other threats that could be countered with brute force or sheer numbers, Patton required constant vigilance, foresight, and a willingness to adapt, qualities that many German officers struggled to maintain as their resources dwindled. Hitler's strategic warnings were also steeped in a grudging acknowledgement of Patton's psychological impact. He reportedly told his generals that facing Patton was as much a battle of nerves as it was a battle of arms. The American general's intensity, unpredictability, and reputation for relentless pursuit could demoralize even veteran troops. Hitler emphasized that underestimating Patton's ability to create panic and confusion could be disastrous. German leaders were instructed to treat every advance seriously, to expect rapid breakthroughs, and to resist the temptation to assume that Patton's aggressiveness could be contained. This level of detail in his warnings was unusual for Hitler, who often overestimated German resilience and underestimated Allied skill. In the case of Patton, he seemed to grasp that sheer audacity, combined with tactical brilliance, could overcome even entrenched defenses. Even as the war grew increasingly desperate for Germany, Hitler's words suggest he never stopped thinking about Patton. Every discussion with his generals included a measure of caution, a reminder that the American general's name carried weight not just on the battlefield but in the minds of German officers. Hitler's warnings weren't just about avoiding defeat, they were about survival, about recognizing the kind of leadership that could outmatch planning and resources alike. In a way, these warnings served as a window into Hitler's own fears, revealing that even he could be unnerved by a commander who combined speed, strategy, and psychological savvy in ways few could match. By the time Patton's forces were moving through the heart of Europe, Hitler's repeated admonitions to his generals underscore a striking truth. He understood that this was a man who couldn't be contained by conventional defenses, a general whose audacity demanded respect, vigilance, and extraordinary preparation. Even in those last months, as Germany's collapse seemed inevitable, Hitler's strategic warnings reveal not only his recognition of Patton's genius but also the very real threat he posed. A threat so serious that the Nazi high command was forced to reconsider the limits of their own strategies in the face of one extraordinary opponent. By the time the final months of the war arrived, the impact of George S. Patton on Nazi leadership had become more than tactical. It was psychological. Hitler's earlier assessments and warnings had set the stage. But now, as the German army struggled to hold its crumbling defenses, the fear of Patton and the mark he left on the German high command became unmistakable. Reports from Hitler's inner circle suggest that even among hardened generals, Patton's reputation inspired a mix of respect, anxiety, and outright dread. He wasn't merely a capable general. He was a force that seemed to embody the relentless momentum of the Allied advance, the kind of presence that could demoralize armies long before a shot was fired. Hitler and his officers understood that Patton's brilliance wasn't limited to his mastery of armored warfare or his rapid, aggressive maneuvers. His genius lay in the combination of speed, decisiveness, and psychological pressure. Patton's troops moved quickly, striking hard and unexpectedly, often exploiting gaps in German lines that others might have overlooked. But beyond this, Hitler recognized that Patton could manipulate the perceptions of his enemies, creating an aura of inevitability around his campaigns. Even when German forces were well positioned or fortified, the constant threat of Patton's unpredictable movements forced commanders into a defensive mindset, a state of tension that drained energy and focus from other critical tasks. Hitler reportedly remarked that this quality made Patton uniquely dangerous because he was not just Attacking positions. He was attacking confidence, morale, and the very sense of control among German officers. The fear Patton inspired among Nazi leadership also reflected the broader collapse of German strategic options. In many cases, Hitler's generals were left scrambling to respond to moves that seemed audacious, even reckless, but which invariably worked because of Patton's skill and decisiveness. Hitler himself acknowledged that the American general had a knack for turning chaos into opportunity, for striking at moments when Germany seemed strongest. This realization fueled an almost obsessive focus on Patton, with German commanders constantly trying to anticipate his next move, often to no avail. The combination of his mobility, aggressiveness, and ability to exploit weakness meant that he was seen as a commander who could disrupt even the most meticulously planned German operations. Hitler's reflections also suggest a grudging admiration that went hand in hand with fear. Despite the devastation Patton caused, he was a figure the Nazi leadership could not help but respect. He represented everything Germany once prided itself on in military doctrine: initiative, audacity, and a willingness to take calculated risks. But unlike German generals who sometimes hesitated or followed rigid orders, Patton acted with instinctive understanding of the battlefield and an almost relentless drive to push forward. For Hitler, this combination of qualities made Patton not only a worthy adversary but one whose impact on the outcome of the war could not be ignored. The psychological weight Patton carried extended beyond immediate battlefield results. Hitler reportedly warned his generals that failing to account for Patton's presence and tactics could lead to cascading failures across entire sectors. Even as the Third Reich teetered on the brink of collapse, the name Patton was enough to shift defensive priorities, redirect troops, and generate a level of anxiety that few Allied commanders had achieved. He became, in effect, a symbol of the unstoppable momentum of the Allies. A reminder that Germany's defenses were no longer just under pressure. They were being systematically dismantled by a general whose vision, speed, and ruthlessness were unmatched. Ultimately, the legacy of Patton in the minds of Nazi leaders was defined by fear intertwined with respect. Hitler's repeated focus on him illustrates a profound truth. Some opponents leave marks not just on the battlefield but on the very strategies and psyche of their enemies. Patton's combination of tactical genius, leadership, and psychological acumen created a shadow over the German command that persisted until the very end of the war. In the halls of Hitler's bunkers, among his generals, and across the faltering German defenses, Patton loomed large, not merely as an adversary, but as a force that shaped decisions, inspired caution, and commanded a grudging admiration that underscored just how extraordinary he had been. His influence lingered, a testament to the power of audacity, skill, and relentless drive in shaping the course of history.